A major new threat from U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who says that if there are no signs of progress, the U.S. might abandon efforts to find an end to Russia's war on Ukraine. Russia, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, met with both Ukrainian and European officials on Thursday. But now he says the U.S. might just move on. Let's get right to CNN's Nick Robertson for the very latest on this. What exactly is the secretary saying, Nick?
Yeah, he's saying that there's a degree of frustration coming from the White House that President Trump has put 87 days into this already. He said everyone recognizes that you can't make a deal in the space of 12 hours. I think it's worth mentioning that President Trump had originally said it could be done in double that, 24 hours. But he's talking about a level of frustration. He did say, and these are the first details we really had from the Secretary of State following those meetings yesterday, that the input that came from the Germans, the French, and the British around the table there was useful and constructive. But he lays out a scenario whereby he wants answers and the U.S. wants to move along if they don't get the right answers about the possibility of peace. This is how he framed it.
The president has spent 87 days at the highest level of his government repeatedly taking efforts to bring this war to an end. We are now reaching a point where we need to decide and determine whether this is even possible or not, which is why we're engaging both sides. We need to figure out here now within a matter of days whether this is doable in the short term, because if it's not, then I think we're just going to move on from our perspective.
So this here, what he laid out at those meetings, it appears a broad framework is how he described it, as how the United States sees the possibility for ceasefire talks going forward. Ukraine, of course, already signing up to unconditional ceasefire. Putin and Russia prevaricating, raising different points. It's not clear here whether Rubio is referring that the right answers need to come from the Europeans, the Ukrainians, or the Russians, or everyone. But there is an anticipation that there will be a meeting early next week, potentially here in London.
Yeah, look, as you point out, there is a history of Trump and Marco Rubio being tough on Ukraine, less than tough on Russia. Is there a sense on who he's trying to nudge along here, especially because the Ukrainians just basically announced the framework for a mineral deal with the United States?
Look, I think you have to read this as the pressures on the Ukrainians. We know from President Trump yesterday he is still dissatisfied and not happy with President Zelensky. Marco Rubio this morning spoke about the Ukrainian delegation needing to go back and speak to President Zelensky. President Zelensky last night again appeared to reiterate what he said before about Steve Witkoff and Witkoff's meetings with Putin, that Witkoff is buying the Russian narrative here, and that potentially the illusion from what we heard from what President Zelensky said last night about this broad framework could include details about concessions on land. And Zelensky has said that the unconditional ceasefire they signed up to does not have any specificity on that area at all, and that's not specificity that they're willing to get into. They've got red lines on it. So it perhaps appears here as if the Ukrainians are being pushed in order to get to the next stage, as President Trump wants, to say that they're going to be willing to give up territory. And that's been a red line so far.
Yeah, Ukraine under the gun, literally and figuratively here. Nick Robertson, thank you for your reporting on this.
When Donald Trump was on the campaign trail, he frequently made this particular promise.
That is a war that's dying to be settled. I will get it settled before I even become president.
Well, Inauguration Day has, of course, come and gone. Now, 3 months later, it seems like the Trump administration might be the one on the verge of giving up. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters just hours ago.
We need to figure out here now within a matter of days whether this is doable in the short term, because if it's not, then I think we're just going to move on.
These comments come one day after Rubio and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff met with European and Ukrainian allies, and they presented a peace plan that received a, quote, encouraging reception. Group chat is back. We're going to do a little international now. And there are some who benefits from a delay, because some people would say Russia is going to say, sure, you've run out of patience. Great for us. Tiffany?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's back up a little bit and say the only reason that we are in this position to begin with is, you know, you look back at the failed departure out of Afghanistan that emboldened the evils of this world, emboldened Putin to even take on Ukraine. So Trump is now in a position where he's cleaning up the mess from the previous administration. You know, President Biden drug his feet on getting weapons and just drug this out to the point where it is now. So President Trump is obviously the master negotiator. He's working also on making sure that this deal works for the American people, whether we can mine rare minerals.
Patience, dragging something out versus not dragging something out. You think that there is a limit to patience?
No, I think President Trump will get the deal done. I think they're working day and night. This is the first 100 days of his presidency. He's been working fast and furious, and he has made it very
not in
clear.
The next. We just want to kind of address Rubio. It sounds like they're saying, look, short term, maybe not.
I just think back to that really chaotic Oval Office meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, and the message that was being sent there was that we are running out of patience here. I hear that echoed in Marco Rubio's statement. They came a long way to get to the point where they are this close to a deal.
Came a long way very quickly, we should say.
Very quickly. Yeah. I was shocked. So I think now what you're seeing is the same type of tactic moving forward, which is you need to move fast, Ukraine, or else we're going to lose patience. This is just sort of the deal-making process that you're seeing with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
Quickly, though, the one thing that's interesting to me, Rubio being the person coming out with this message. Do you remember him during that meeting, Audie?
Yeah.
He was sitting there slumped, not saying a word.
Was.
Now he's the spokesperson. How the cards have turned over.
Because he was, when he was a senator, one of the people who was advocating for pushing back against Russia. And from what I recall, the invasion of Ukraine is blaming on Russia, regardless of what you think about whether or not the United States helped as much as it could or couldn't. This is a war that was started by Russia and their invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
But the pressure right now that the Trump administration is putting on is on the Ukrainians, right, to settle this. Really, at the end of the day, Russia could just stop.
It's
that would be
interesting
easy.
for the point you made about Rubio, because for a time I thought if Witkoff isn't there, is there really a deal? Like, I wasn't totally sure what Rubio is doing, or if he was on the things they didn't have time to be focused on.
Yep.
Is that a bad, I've heard that perception.
Remember that tension between Rubio and Musk, right? I think that Rubio wants to step into this role and make sure that he has power. This is one of the most important international diplomacy things that we're dealing with right now as a country. Of course, he wants to be the spokesperson, the person who's managing it, because in the past, I think he was taking too much of a back seat, and he didn't like feeling disempowered.
There are still Republicans who are concerned about how the Trump administration is treating Ukraine. And there are still Republicans who are concerned about Ukraine itself. It's an intra-party conversation about the nature of the U.S. role in the world. So what happens now? Do they get to speak up, or do you think they've pretty much been shunted?
Who, Ukraine?
No, the Republicans who are pro-Ukraine.
No, I don't think so. I think everyone's voice is open at the table. But look, we have to get to a deal, and I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a pressure campaign to get this deal done. Zelensky did not have a good showing when he came to the White House at all. And, you know, he was talking to the American people who've given that country millions and millions and millions of dollars. So, no, I think Trump's laser focused on getting a deal done that works for the American people.
What are you going to be watching for, Nair, in the next couple of days? If we're running out of time, what are we looking for?
Yeah, the truth is, I'm not sure what the running out of time is based on. Is it just based on whether or not Trump has the attention span for this? Because this is a war that Ukraine is fighting for their livelihoods and for their land. And there's been zero pressure on Russia to do anything or pull back or make any concessions. It seems to be that Ukraine is being blamed for being the victim.